Educating History in the Transnational Space, Media-Based Holocaust Reception in 8 Countries was the title of a conference of the University of Vienna. Professor Jürgen Grimm, you are the initiator of this conference and workshop. What was the inducement of this project?
There is a personal and a societal cause. The personal occasion was that German and Austrian pupils are obligated to be confronted with the pictures of the Holocaust as a part of the tragic history of Germany. And it's the same in Austria, and the sense is to learn from history. And so we asked as communication scientists how communicate on Holocaust to learn the lectures also for the future generations.
Okay, you traveled around the world. You were in a few countries. You started in Austria, I think, and Germany.
Yes, I think this was a necessity to start in the countries with the descendants of the perpetrators. We are not moralists who want to improve the world, but we want to start to be confronted with the negative aspect of our own history, and this is clear to do this in the context of the Holocaust in Vienna, for example. We started there with a sample of Austrians and Germans to see what young people nowadays learn from a documentary called A Night in Fog. This is a very famous documentary from Vernet, and this is a basic stimulus of our measurement we started in Vienna.
And you were in Israel as well. What were your experiences as a scientist and a German in Israel especially?
This was not an easy experience for us. One of the first questions from the Israelis to me was, what did you do in 1938? I answered, I wasn't born in this time. The background of the question is, what did your family or your compatriots of this time in the context of the Holocaust? And it's for me a very deep, movable experience to come in discussion with the descendants of the victims. And this is the reason to go after the descendants country of perpetrators to the descendants country of the victims.
Where have you been in Israel?
Okay, this is an interesting point of our research. We were in Ariel. This is in the midst of the occupied part of Israel with a huge amount of Palestinians, and it was very interesting for us to see the reactions of Arabic students and of original Jewish students there, because our thinking in general on history is that history is not over. It's a tool to learn from past for the present, and you can imagine that Arabic student will be a completely different perspective on the Holocaust than a son of a survivor of the Holocaust, for example.
And in Russia? Is it over there?
Russia was our third station. The reason for this is that the Holocaust nowadays is getting a paradigm of a general preach of civilization, and not only in a specific sense of national states, for example Israel or Germany or Austria. It's a general sign of what can human beings do in a very negative way when they forget their education and their civilization and their culture. And so far it's in general interesting to see also other nations in their reaction to the Holocaust. In the specific case of Russia, it's interesting that that Russia was involved in the Holocaust in an indirect way. They were also a target of the Hitler army aggression. They were attacked and they had a lot of victims, about 20 million, more than in the Holocaust. And the question is, how can they associate their own experience, first as victims, then as victors, in association with the experience of the Jewish people? Can they involve this and include in their own narrative of the Great Patriotic War? This is a dominant perspective of history of the Second World War in Russia. Or are they tend to exclude this as a part of history who is not interested for Russian people?
But when you think about Ukraine with Holodomor, Holocaust, this inclusion of memory and memory culture, is it good for them? How do they feel about the 20th century?
The Ukraine is another example that history is not over, that there is a secret connection between past and present. In this case, the Ukraine was involved in a very contradictory way. A part of the Ukrainian people fought together with the Hitler army against the Red Army, and the other part were part of the Red Army, and so you see this is a very difficult situation. And the second aspect of the Ukraine is that they have a very traumatic experience with, they called it Holodomor, the big famine of the 30s of the 20th century, in which, in the consequence of the Stalin terror, a lot of people, perhaps 6 or 8 million or 10 million, there are different estimations, died. And they are very focused on this national tragedy. And the question in this case is, how can they differentiate their own history picture when they confronted with the Holocaust? And also, what is the consequence for the point of view of the current conflict between the Ukraine and Russia?
So let's go back to our neighbors in Hungary. The 20th century was a really confusing and hard time for Hungary as well. What were your experiences there?
Hungary is a very interesting specific case. Each country has its own Holocaust. This is our convenience and our experience. In the case of Hungary, it's important to see that the country sees themselves as the victim in different historical contexts, starting with the Middle Age and also in the time of the monarchy together with Austria, and also after the Second World War, when the Soviet regime came over the country. And in the times of the Nazi regime, they had also a strong fascist movement, the strongest in Europe, beside of Germany and Austria. And so it's interesting to see that they see the Holocaust as a paradigm for their own being a victim, an eternal victim, you can say. And I think it's very interesting to see the consequences of this approach to history for the present political situation. And you know that in nowadays the tendency is growing towards direction of authoritarian regimes and right-wing populism. And I think the Holocaust could be a tool of communication to bring a little bit confusion in the thinking.
You have invited scientists from Turkey as well. What are the similar but also different experiences in the country with a Muslim majority? All
our researches have a provoking aspect, and in this case we confronted Islamic people with Jewish victims, and Islamic people tend, especially in Turkey, to feel sympathy with the Palestinians, and this is another example that history is not over. In this case, the perspective on the current conflict between Israel and Palestine influence the perspective of the Holocaust, and in this case we can affirm that this happened, and we will see in the conference how our Turkish friends came in the discussion on the Holocaust with the hypothesis, perhaps they have not connection, but they have, we know, and I think that it's very important to break the established contradictory between the Islamic world and the Christian or the Jewish world, and insofar it's a part of our humanistic approach to include in the big discourse on Holocaust also Islamic characterized country like Turkey.
So we were in Turkey, in Russia, in Ukraine, in Hungary, in Austria, in Germany, but what about Vietnam? What is the remembrance in Vietnam?
Yes, Vietnam seems far away, but it isn't. On the level of memory culture, it's very close to the central neuralgic aspect of European memory culture. You can say the Holocaust is the biggest breach of civilization we had in the 20th century. But if you go a little bit in earlier times, you have the experience of the colonial wars, the French war, perhaps in Vietnam, also the British wars in India or in North America. And I think it's very logical to include this aspect in the commemorance of the Holocaust, because it strengthens both events strengthens the self-critical dimension of memory culture at all. And I'm very happy that it was possible to include our Vietnamese friends in our collaboration.
Thank you. My last question is, what is the aim of this transnational conference in a few words?
We started the project 6 years ago, and we collected a lot of data, and we learned that each country has its own Holocaust. There are different effects of the same documentary in the different countries. But this is the scientific aspect. The societal aspect is to bring now the different perspectives together in a big discourse. And the intention is, if you compare the different national perspectives on the Holocaust, you have a better chance to come to the kernel of this experience, which is the affirmation of humanitarian values. And I hope that this will happen. I don't know this, you could say, is the societal aspect, not the scientific one, but it's also an experiment.
It's an experiment for you?
I think so, and I'm very curious on the results of this.
So we're really looking forward to this scientific convention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jürgen. As the head of Department of Communication, it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this conference. It's a great pleasure that we are having this conference here at our university and here at our department. I think it's a very unique conference. It's a very important conference, mainly because of, I think, three important reasons. First, as you can see in the program, and as you all know, it's a comparative endeavor by including several countries. And when you look at the program, you see countries such as Austria, Germany, Hungary, Israel, Russia, Ukraine, Vietnam, Turkey, and I apologize if I forgot to mention one. And I think this is really important, and we should not forget about that. Why? Because in most of social science research, we conduct our research in single country context, and we tend to completely forget that all our findings we observe are tied to idiosyncrasies of our single countries, of the specific context we do our research in, and we tend to ignore that and generalize our findings, our insights beyond the contextual boundaries our research is originated from. And I think this is a severe limitation of a huge share of social scientific research. In a comparative perspective, and that's what you are doing today and tomorrow, by including several countries and by being able to compare insights from several countries on the same or at least a related topic, you can much better flesh out what kind of insights are unique to a specific context, and are there any overarching patterns when it comes to Holocaust reception, or overarching topics that can be generalized beyond a specific context. I think the importance of doing this cannot be stressed high enough for scientific insight, and that is why it's very important that you come together here, a specific group discussing on a very specific topic beyond single country limitations. The second unique thing about this conference is that it's interdisciplinary. Okay. In all Sunday speeches, or almost any conference openings, you will have the word interdisciplinary, and it's always stressed. I would say that interdisciplinary research is not a mean in itself. It's not always important. However, for a topic like this, it is simply a necessity. It's impossible to do this from the perspective of a single discipline. In media effects research, and this is my personal foundation as a scholar, we tend to shamefully ignore history as a research topic and history reception in particular. This topic doesn't simply exist in the mainstream research on media effects, and I think we shamefully neglect that. I'm not a historian, but when you look at history as a discipline, I'm tempted to say that history tends to ignore questions of media influence or the role of media in shaping and framing or reframing history, the role of media in understanding history. And what you are doing today is bringing both perspectives together, and the importance of doing this can't be rated high enough, in my opinion, to leave the limits of an own discipline and reach out to other disciplines in order to truly answer research questions. And the third unique thing is that the conference takes place here at our university, and especially is associated with our Department of Communication. I'd like to remind ourselves that our department was founded in 1942 as a national socialistic department with clear ties to the political elite at the time. And it's very important that we should not forget our roots as a department and also our responsibility as scholars to remind ourselves that we have a certain responsibility, because we deal with topics where it's important that we take a stand, and it's also it's important what kind of insights and what kind of knowledge we generate. It's very important to society at large, and I think we should not forget that. Having said that, finally, I'd like to thank very much Professor Jürgen Grimm for his tireless efforts in making this conference happen. I've known you, Jürgen, now for almost 5 years, and since we met, you have enthusiastically talked about this topic in almost any meeting we had. And I know that this project and this conference is not only a research project to you. I know what it means to you, and I know how hard you have been working to accomplish this. It's in my reading, it's not only a research project that everyone does. For you, Jürgen, I think it's also a lifetime achievement, a lifetime task that is really truly tied to your personality as a researcher. And I'd like to give you my warmest thanks for making this possible, for bringing so many different scholars from so many different countries together on a topic that is ignored by the majority of the discipline, and I think you deserve, even before starting the conference, a big round of applause from all of us. Finally, I'd like to thank you all for coming to Vienna today and tomorrow. I'd like to thank you all for joining and for discussing, for presenting your research, your insights, for participating in this research project. Unfortunately, I can't be with you today because I have another meeting starting at 10, and then I'm in class all day until 5. Sometimes you make decisions as a scholar that you tend to regret. Anyhow, I'm pretty convinced you will have a wonderful conference, you will have a great time in Vienna, and I wish you all the best. Enjoy the conference, enjoy your time here in Vienna. Thank you.
Professor Mattes and Jörg for your very, very positive greetings for our conference, and especially to me. I thank you for this, because it's not so easy in times in which specific topics who are connected with career plannings have a societal aspect. And in this case, and Jörg focused on this, it's not only academic meaning, it's also a societal experiment we do today, because the society here in Vienna is part of this history we have to discuss today. And some say they were on the part of the victims, the survivors, they are, but they are also entangled on the part of the perpetrator, not only the Germans. And I know what this means. I have German roots, and you are right. This is not only for me an academic topic, it's also a personal need, because it's a topic who accompanied my biography completely. It's a starting point of political thinking, and to think in the categories of humanity and enlightening. And I am very thankful for this education, I would say, and a little bit from this spirit I try to bring back to our research. Before we do this in an academic sense, I'm very happy that we have Magister Fastenbauer here. He is the head of the Jewish community, and that's right. Regret for this. And I'm very happy that he will start our conference with his perspective on the question, or also the problems of living together in a town with this history as a Jewish community and a not Jewish part of popularity we have also here in Vienna. Please, Mr.
Dear Professor Grimm, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure for me to bring you the greetings of the Jewish community, and it's even more a pleasure that because we have been able to support a research project about the reception of the Holocaust, which I understand forms the basis of this conference. Let me make a personal statement which gives naturally a view from an Austrian perspective only. I am an ex-member of the '68 generation. I was not one of those on the barricades, but I finished high school in Vienna in 1968. And what we learned in history ended with the year 1923. What was 1923? 1923, Kemal Atatürk came to power in Turkey. We learned nothing about the First Austrian Republic, and nothing about the Shoah, about the Nazi time. Why? Our school principal was a member of one of the big parties, and his deputy was a member of the other party, and they did not want to hurt each other. So no talk about the Austrian Civil War, and the Nazi period naturally was not a topic at all. Judaism was a taboo for Jews and for non-Jews. And the experiences of the Jewish survivors of the Shoah were even in Jewish families in many cases a taboo. There were quite a few who chose the path of complete assimilation. We did not want to impose on our children and grandchildren what we had to go through, was how my parents justified themselves years later. I remember two things that helped to develop the discussion about the Holocaust, not only in my family, which has Jewish and non-Jewish roots, but altogether in society. One kick-off was a TV series called Ringstraßenpalais, about the story of a Jewish family that assimilated in the Viennese bourgeoisie. My reaction was, this we could play ourselves, we don't need the television for this. The second was a TV series called Holocaust. These were the first times I remember the TV media showing this topic. Later, the course Waldheim did its part. In recent years, much has changed for the better. There are extensive classes of contemporary history in the schools, and pupils go to Mauthausen or to Auschwitz. The one-sided, half-true narrative of Austria as the first victim has been overcome. Branitzky and Klestil were talking about the country of victims and perpetrators. Did we draw enough conclusions for the present and the future? Commemoration must not be limited to anti-fascist rituals of remembrance, and scientific research on the Shoah must not be detached from the society. We have to prevent a repeated development of an ideology that is similar to National Socialism. History can repeat itself, but not necessarily in the same way, perhaps in a similar or modified or copied form. On the other side, the term Holocaust should not be used inflationary out of political interest in a questionable manner. Multidimensional parting of history, the model that has been developed within the research project, can make a significant contribution to determine the knowledge and humanity transfer of historical communication and the effect it has on national identity. Together, you all can work in this direction. Hopefully we shall overcome, and I wish you much success in this conference.
Thank you, Magister Fassenbauer, for this very warm greetings and the good wishes for our conference. Before we start now in the content-oriented part, I will introduce my new colleague, Bettina Power. She will assist me to moderate this discussion because it's a little bit too much for me. In all situations, have this position of moderation, and I will be a little bit in the background, and perhaps we will do it together if necessary. Bettina will make the official part of the moderation.